What splits the wheat from the chaff in comedy is understanding and being able to play into your strengths. It makes sense when you're just starting off to try a bunch of different things because that's how you figure out what you're good at. But by the time you've matured to the point that you can fill an hour of comedy with material that people want to see, most comedians have narrowed down what they're good at, and more importantly, what they're not. John Mulaney is a rare example in the comedy world because he doesn't just have one or two approaches for making a joke, he has 4. Let's start with the simplest and most common, pop culture references.
Hey, do all of you not know a lot about Steely Dan? Cause a bunch of the holy shit.
Well, perhaps it's better if we just call them culture references. You'd be forgiven for not noticing this because in the sea that is John Mulaney, a culture reference is essentially water in the sense that it's everywhere and given very little emphasis.
Almost like she was trying to solve a conspiracy about her daughter. A Beautiful Mind style. That's actually stand-up comedian Dan Levy when he looked like Frank Caliendo doing John Madden. But if you leave your baby with Gary Busey... Walked into the ballroom, was packed with people. It's the ballroom from the end of the movie The Fugitive. Remember? So, they tricked me. They tricked me like Brendan Dassey on Making a Murderer. Meanwhile, Petunia's just staring at us with her Paul Giamatti face like... That's like a support group for men in crisis with keynote speakers John Voight and Alec Baldwin. Like when my dad and I would talk, it was like that scene in the movie Heat, just like working on one Cheerio with Bobby Fischer-like intensity, like Back to the Future. That was a movie like breathing like Chris Christie. Like Ocean's 11 with women wouldn't work. You should watch a little program called Law and Order Special Victims Unit. And I had that thought that only blackout drunks and Steve Urkel can have. It was like that scene in Ratatouille when the humans come in the kitchen and all the rats go in different ways. We all ran in different directions. Is that Dean Cain? Fucking Dean Cain. It's pretty cool.
It wouldn't be a crime to have given them the spotlight, but it would have changed the act quite a bit. As it stands, these small comments make up a lot of the fit and finish of the joke. Nothing really hinges on them. The jokes would be funny whether or not he ever made these references, but their addition, and more importantly their placement, helped to put John Mulaney into a league of his own.
It's like, Jesus Christ, what were you two in the Eagles together? What is the animosity about?
If he were to place them in a position of some importance, it might end up looking similar to something Jeselnik has done in the past.
I used to have a little 2-year-old son, but he died the same way Eric Clapton's son died. For inspiration.
How Mulaney said differs is that Mulaney was not making a joke about the Eagles. He was making a joke about real estate agents. Conversely, Jeselnik was making a joke about Eric Clapton. A better example is sometimes he'll mention things without even really mentioning them. After all, if you had an entire section of your set dedicated to The Fugitive, you would be forgiven for hiding 1 or 2 Easter eggs.
Marriage is gonna be very magical. I didn't kill my wife! That's like, ooh, who's that fella?
Speaking of asides, Mulaney uses asides. Like, a lot.
It's the ballroom from the end of the movie The Fugitive. Because you know how you lie to your parents? The end where Harrison Ford as Dr. Richard Kimball. Fun, because male, you know? Why does Kimball confront Nichols? Well, I know we all know this, but Kimball, he found out.
Some are their own little self-contained jokes.
I didn't mean to make it sound like we don't want children. We don't, but I didn't mean to make it sound like that.
A few of these are clearly references in their own right.
He goes, you switched the samples, and you doctored your research.
Others just work as little eccentric dollops that help to break up the routine.
You know how you talk to a child?
And still others help to accentuate the particular feeling or emotion that he's trying to convey.
I was sitting up in bed a few weeks ago like, life.
Still though, it's not a meal. You really can't have a meal that's all sides unless it's Thanksgiving, and then it's the preferred option. So let's look at what John Mulaney is doing when he's not interrupting himself or quoting old movies that no one else has watched.
13 when I'm 10, that's just like hiring a slightly bigger child. That would be like if you're going out of town for the week and you paid a horse to watch your dog.
Mulaney makes the best analogies. His analogies can actually be used in a variety of ways, either to quickly paint an image.
It was totally unsupervised. We were like dogs without horses. We were running wild.
Or he can create an analogy that lays the groundwork for the vocabulary of an entire bit.
It's like there's a horse loose in a hospital.
Just imagine that situation for a moment. It doesn't actually matter what he's describing because the following works in any scenario that you would not have believed possible come true. And he's able to pull this fictitious situation into your mind and describe all parts of it. For example, people seeking attention for unrelated events.
We're joined now by a man that once saw a bird in the airport. It's
Crazy scenarios that become very likely in the new world.
be like, the horse used the elevator.
And the feeling of stress that comes with all of this.
The creepiest days are when you don't hear from the horse at all.
However, like most things, this does eventually start to fall apart.
That shouldn't be allowed no matter who the horse is.
Sadly, Mulaney's not perfect.
Analogies are so tricky.
Overall, this comes across way better and shows off so much more of Mulaney's skill than you realize, particularly when you see that he's not the only person who's attempted to mention things without mentioning them.
I don't know what he's gonna do next. And the people that voted for him, they don't know what he's gonna do next.
Nothing against Maron. I love his comedy almost as much as I love his cats, but after watching John Mulaney, I feel happy, which I would argue is a necessary part of a comedy show. After watching Marc Maron, I don't necessarily, and that places his work much more in the realm of a one-man show. However, not all of his analogies are complex, veiled expressions of fear and anxiety. Some are just a good way of explaining his thoughts.
I more feel bad for weed dealers because they're about to find out that we only showed them a certain amount of politeness because they had an illegal product. And we don't show that same politeness to people who deliver legal products. Like when the Chinese food delivery guy comes, we don't let him hang out after he's delivered the Chinese food.
When you follow that through to its conclusion, the relationship that some people have with their drug dealers is actually quite silly. But it's difficult to see that because we hold weed dealers in such a different spot of our mind than we do the pizza guy.
Like when the Chinese food delivery guy comes, we don't let him hang out after he's delivered the Chinese food. And we don't look the other way when he says weird shit to the girls we're hanging out with. And we definitely don't give him some of the Chinese food.
What Mulaney's done here is discovered a great schism of how a delivery person is treated based solely on the product they're delivering. He's able to assert this more quickly and effectively via an analogy than he ever would have been able to do if he was just walking us through the differences. I'd like to take a moment to remind you of something Bo Burnham once said.
Never waste a moment. Every moment can become a comedic moment.
Given Mulaney is decent at filling every crook and cranny in his act, it is difficult to see what else is left. But this is where John Mulaney really becomes a comedian that you need to watch. Because between the little moments are little gestures, which sometimes will just garnish a joke.
In Nazi Germany,
It's perfume.
However, sometimes it's used to add a whole nother layer of emotion to the joke.
But
why? It's not like he's gonna remember you.
I see a lot of comedians are moving away from the mics and the mic stands in lieu of the cordless or the headsets. But that's not possible for Mulaney because so much of his set is tied to how he uses the mic and its cord. On top of that, his gestures and movements can become a trend throughout his set.
Where's the money? Where's that money, you fat motherfucker? Where's my money? Stay down on the ground. Stay down on the ground, you motherfucker.
Here, we have a culture reference that is accentuated by some rather violent kicking, which is then repeated later on, almost as a callback.
All right, next sentence.
And by the time he does it a third time, it's practically a trend.
Sing, God damn it.
So this brings us to the two big things that tie all of this together. The first is an understanding of how to get the most out of the time he has. An hour-long special is not 12 5-minute sets, nor is it 2 sitcom episodes. A difference in length becomes a difference in kind. For example, you can spend a longer time constructing a much more complicated punchline over an hour than you ever could in a 5-minute window. What Mulaney does well is he has one-liners that work very well on places like late night television.
I was like remember that movie Florence Foster Jenkins, and we hold for applause?
But his specials are where he really starts to flex his skill, primarily with callbacks. Both the obtuse.
We were like dogs without horses. We were running wild. What's your name? Sam? Cool. Imagine Sam was becoming the president.
And the subtle.
And then my dad said, just explain to me this. How are you better than a Nazi? And when I was a kid, Nazis was just an analogy you would use to decimate your child during an argument at the dinner table.
The subtle ones in particular are interesting because they come across as almost off the cuff, when in reality, we all know that's not happening. His ability to fold older punchlines back into a set down the road means that the second half of his set picks up pace. He can work in more jokes with seemingly less effort because he's prepaid that work. This leads us to the crux that is John Mulaney. His secret is not that he has all of these skills living side by side, it's that he has all of these skills living together. A basic example of this is when he emphasizes a callback by pairing it with a gesture.
Nah, sister. You're not getting me to no secondary location. You want it? Go get it.
It's the simplest of ideas to place one of these in front of the other, but it is incredibly elevating for the bit. And he mixes and matches these together in a variety of ways.
And all of us are like, okay. Like poor Andy Cohen at those goddamn reunions.
But my downright favorite is how he integrates a Clinton reference with 2 gestures and a callback, all in the space of 10 seconds.
Why? It's not like he's gonna remember you.
In case you missed it, I really need you to watch the mic here.
One black coffee.
And of course, he knows exactly how to finish this. And just listen to that applause. That is a joke that is ostensibly 50 minutes in the making. Mulaney is truly one of the best working comedians today, and he deserves all of the success and accolades that he's receiving. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'm going to plug myself a bit here, but to make it more enjoyable, I thought you'd like to see some of the things that I cut. For example, New in Town's outro credits Amy Schumer as a woman. Mulaney gives Mick Jagger grief for how he writes songs.
Motherfucker, is this how you write songs?
When Stefan as Mulaney essentially came together by luck.
I said, I think you should have an Ed Hardy shirt. I did not know what an Ed Hardy shirt was.